All in Sports Network. We love sports.
It is Thursday, November 7th, and this is your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns right here on All In Horns. I'm Tanner Carlson along with Jake Jimerson, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network, and the votes are in. The College Football Playoff Committee has released the first college football 12-team playoff polls, and we are going to diagnose, dissect, and just dive in deep into what those polls look like. The top 25 has been announced and what the top 12 playoffs would look like if it was released this weekend. Now, obviously, it is only week 11. There are still a lot of games to be played. There could be a lot of shakeup within these conferences. But, Jake, what was your initial response, reaction, thoughts that went through your brain whenever you saw the top 25, and then when you saw what the actual first look at what the 12-team playoff looked like? My initial thought was, oh, this is a thing of beauty. This is what I've been waiting for such a long time with a 12-team playoff. But the polls, I thought, there's some discussion to be had, and that's perfectly fine. I think that's why they come out with these things.
Yeah, I felt like somewhere Mike Leach was smiling from up above.
Yeah.
He was always a big fighter for having a playoff system, and I always agreed with the premise of his argument that at the high school level, at the Division I FCS level, the Division II, the Division III, NAIA Division I and II, and the NFL level, all of them had a bigger expanded playoff format. College football, Division I FBS was the only one not to follow through. And now the 4-team system always felt like a bit of a tease. It just wasn't enough for me.
To me, a 4-team playoff is not a playoff.
No,
with 4 teams.
And there's going to be you're going to have a committee picking, and there's going to be too much bias involved, and teams got screwed too often in the 4-team playoff era. Florida State, even though they got blown out last year, if a team goes undefeated, they should at least have the opportunity to play for a national title. And then obviously I think they did the format pretty good overall, just with making sure that a group 5 team is going to get in, like a Boise State this year, if they end the year with 1 loss, and that 1 loss being at the number 1 team in the country by a last second field goal. I don't care if it's a 4-team playoff, a 12-team playoff, they should have a chance to play for a national title. And so I'm glad that now finally those opportunities are going to be there. And it's just exciting. It just feels I've done my rant this year about why the 12-team playoff means more games are important. And I think this poll shows it, because there are still a lot of teams, almost every team in the top 25. I think not every team, but almost every team in the top 25 still probably has a pretty good shot at making the playoff if they can win out.
Yeah, and obviously they're going to need some teams to lose, but they still have a chance to play some of those teams in a head-to-head matchup to make sure that they get that. And to go back to your point, Jake, even with Boise State, I think Boise State being that G5 team this year, and yeah, their season's not over yet. They haven't necessarily clinched a playoff spot. Nobody has yet. For this thing back in the day with the BCS, it kind of started with Boise State. That Boise State Statue of Liberty play in the Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma. And they finished the season, I believe, undefeated that year. And they beat Oklahoma in a BCS game and finished the undefeated season in a New Year's Six bowl game. And they never had an opportunity to play in a national championship. Same thing with TCU. When TCU was in the Mountain West before they moved to the Big 12, they played Wisconsin in a Rose Bowl with Andy Dalton, win that game. And this conversation starts happening of, okay, well, if you go undefeated, what's the point of going undefeated if you're not even going to be allowed to compete for a national championship game? Like, what is it going to take for one of these teams to win a national championship if that's the case? And then I think the icing on the cake, obviously, was the UCF year where they went undefeated and they proclaimed and announced themselves national champions. And then we moved to the 14 playoff format. And I think that's great and stuff. But that was just kind of a precursor for me to say, how great is it for the first year for a 12-team playoff, for it to be Boise State this year of all teams, for it to kind of just come full circle. It just feels like a full circle moment for that program. And I'm all for it. And to have a Heisman candidate running back on top of it, where it's kind of must watch football to see him play, in Ashton Jeanty is just icing on the cake.
Yeah, and just as a season to have the two Heisman frontrunners not be quarterbacks, is a lot of fun in general. It's like a lot of the things that I've complained about in previous years about college football are all being just patched up this year and being fixed and making this one of the fun. And it helps that Texas is really good too. Do not get me wrong; they had 4 losses. I might not be quite as happy right now. That is just the facts of the situation. But when you combine all these things, you have Texas in the SEC for the first time. You have the A&M rivalry coming back this year, and A&M at least looking like a somewhat competent program for the first time and who knows how long. It's just all very exciting and feels like maybe the most exciting college football season of our lifetimes.
Yeah,
I mean, 2007 would be up there where you had like USF, Rutgers, a bunch of those crazy teams in the top 3.
You had Mizzou and Kansas battling out as a 1-2 team in the Big 12 in the last game of the season. And they were both, I think, undefeated at that point, or one was a 1-loss team, something along those lines. And I mean, 2007 was a crazy year, but that doesn't necessarily 2007, just because there's a lot of upsets and there's no like top dog and you don't really know week to week what's going to happen, doesn't necessarily make it the best season or the most exciting season. I think
if there's a playoff that year, there's a 12-team playoff that year. It
would have been wild, right? And I think this year you've got a perfect mix, in my opinion, of teams like Indiana who are undefeated, a BYU who's undefeated, who's very much in the thick of things. You've got some unknown stories of unexpected teams making deep runs. SMU, Pitt, whatever, even a Colorado, if you want to talk about that. But you also have the brand name programs who are also taking care of business that are going to bring in a lot of viewership. Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, Miami, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, all teams that are very much in the thick of this playoff race with those other teams. And so I think when you combine kind of this underdog story along with the top dogs, you're just setting up a perfect storyline of a major upset, major heartbreak, full triumphant, just college football moment that we've never got to experience before.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of the things we talked about early on in this podcast have just aged very well, fortunately for
100%.
us. Just with how these playoff standings look. Also, what kind of stood out to me when I looked at these rankings is just, it feels like in previous years, there's a lot more teams with 3, maybe 4, maybe at this point only 3 losses, but definitely a lot more that were in the top 25 this year. There's by my count 1 team with 3 losses in the top 25, and that's Louisville.
And we'll get to that because I have a case for another team who is not in the top 25 that I believe very well should be over teams with 1 or 2 losses. But we'll go into that in a little bit. But finish your thought.
But that just kind of stood out to me. It was just, there's a lot of 1 loss, only a couple or only a handful of undefeateds, but there's a ton of 1-loss teams right now. And a lot of them are in their same conferences. And unfortunately, you could see maybe the one downside of this year in college football is with no divisions in conferences. Some of these teams that are ranked with 1 loss or 0 loss within the conference do not play each other, which is a little bit weird, but almost in every case, they play at least one of the teams. Yeah. The ACC is really the only one where somehow none of the good teams play any of each other.
Yeah, very, very strange, other than Pitt. Jake, let's go ahead and dive into the top 25. The first announced college football playoff polls have been released. And it came on a Tuesday night where nothing else in the country was going on. So all undivided attention was released on these top 25 polls. Jake, let's go through the top 5. Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, Miami, Texas. Any comment, anything that you'd like to change, anything that you'd see differently, from that point on?
No, I mean, one thing you do have to mention when you're talking about these is this is not how the bracket would look.
Correct.
The bracket theoretically would have BYU in that top 4. That would actually bump Texas down to number 6, by the way. And this is the big thing that stands out. I do not, as much as I am going to say that Bama should not be in the top 12 because they have 2 losses and they're the only team that has 2 losses that's in the top 12. I would have an SMU in over them. I do not want Texas to have to play Alabama in the first round of the playoff to earn a 6 seed and then turn around and have to play Alabama in Austin. That is not, especially when you have a Notre Dame sitting right ahead of Alabama. I'd much rather Texas play a Notre Dame or even a Penn State. But other than that, I mean, I pretty much agree with this top 12. I'd maybe change some of the order things. I would have Indiana probably at number 6, if not number 5.
Yep.
And have I think Miami being 4 is fine, even though I think they're frauds. They're undefeated. You have to rank them up there. So other than maybe changing a few things, I think the only team I would take out of the top 12 and maybe 2 teams would be Alabama and then potentially Notre Dame. But Notre Dame has looked better as the season's gone on. They are a 1-loss team, so I understand them being in there, but I would just probably take Alabama out and throw SMU in is the one change I would for sure make.
Yeah, I think Indiana honestly should be ranked a little bit higher. The way I look at it is just because they're not named Ohio State or Oregon is the only thing preventing them from being a top 4 team in the country right now. Because and yes, I know schedule wise, they haven't necessarily played to that caliber yet in terms of scheduling, but they do play Ohio State. And I think that will be a big determining factor. They have Michigan coming to, or they're going to Michigan, or is it at Indiana? I can't remember which one. However, they're playing Michigan. That's going to be a big name program at Indiana. And then they've got Ohio State the weekend after. Though the next couple of weeks for Indiana is going to be huge. And I know Michigan's not the Michigan team that, was last year's Michigan team, but I still think if you're Indiana, guess what? They're blowing these teams out. And if they were blowing teams out and they had Ohio State as their logo, they'd be the number 1 team in the country right now. And I'm not saying Indiana is the number 1 team in the country right now. I'm just saying the bias towards big name programs is showing within Indiana because they are in a big conference. They're in the Big Ten. They've had to go through the same scheduling as a Penn State or somebody else that would be ranked higher if they had a bigger name attached to it.
Just to support your argument here, and I don't want to spend too long on it, but I just want to run through their scores real quick. I'm not going to say opponents, just scores. 31-7, 77-3, 42-13, 52-14, 42-28, 41-24, 56-7, 31-17, 47-10. Their closest game is 31-17.
Yeah, and if they were Oregon with the exact same schedule, don't give Oregon's schedule, but you give Oregon Indiana's schedule, Oregon would be the number 1 team in the country right now.
Yes, or at least number 2. They would, maybe another team would have some better wins and be undefeated and be number 1, but they would not be behind this many 1-loss teams. I mean, I think Indiana should even be above Texas. Texas hasn't played the hardest schedule, not to their fault. They tried with scheduling in Michigan, but Texas looked shaky last week against Vanderbilt, lost at home to Georgia. I would have an undefeated team over them that hasn't even had a close game yet.
One thing that I was pleasantly surprised with, Jake, was Notre Dame at number 10. I thought Notre Dame, for whatever reason, was just going to kind of have that automatic 5 seed just kind of locked up, and maybe that Northern Illinois team, that loss is still holding them back and putting them at number 10. And maybe just the full body of work that we've seen from Notre Dame up to this point is putting them at number 10. I like the fact that they're a lower seeded team and would not be hosting a playoff game at North Bend right now, because I don't think that they are a top 6 team that would be hosting a playoff game, or I don't think they should be. And so, especially being an independent, I think that actually should hurt them more so than it should help them. Also, one thing just overall, Jake, I think something that we didn't necessarily see, or at least it wasn't spoken out loud from the committee, and as much as I hate saying this, strength of loss, if that's a thing, is they are now counting against, it seems like with a 1-loss Tennessee to a 1-loss Texas. Who did Tennessee lose to? Who did Texas lose to? Texas is ranked above Tennessee because Texas lost to Georgia, whereas Tennessee lost to Arkansas, just as an example.
Yeah, and I think a little bit of eye test plays into that. But to me, eye test isn't a big deal when you have a 12-team playoff, because you're just sorting out seeding at that point. You're not, if you're in a 12-team playoff and you're number 13 and you don't get in, you probably more than likely you didn't deserve to get in the 14 playoff. Eye test becomes a lot more of an issue because you could have a 2-loss team get over an undefeated. UCF goes undefeated, they don't get a chance to play for the title, and so having that 12-team playoff just kind of works that out, and it makes it to me where I don't mind the eye test. Like, yeah, Tennessee should be behind Texas. They even should be behind Penn State. Their offense has been putrid in SEC play, as good as their defense is, and as Texas fans, we're almost spoiled. You think about Texas here and you're like, well, the offense has looked a little shaky. Well, yeah, in the last couple of weeks, just look at the in conference. Tennessee's played one more game than Texas in conference. They've only scored 3 more points than them.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's pretty eye-opening whenever you look at it like that. Also, Jake, let's go ahead and jump down a little bit. Obviously, you round out the top 12 with Bama, Boise State as those last 2 teams in. Let's look at the last 4 teams out. SMU at 8-1, who their only losses to a 9th-ranked BYU team who is undefeated and lost by, I believe, 3 points. You've got a Texas A&M team who is a 2-loss team who has lost to Notre Dame, who is also in one of those 12 spots, and then also lost to South Carolina last week. LSU, who lost to Texas A&M and an unranked USC team. And then Ole Miss, who I think is kind of this outlier at 16, who could definitely play spoiler in the next couple of weeks with games against Georgia and who they have another.
I believe it's Tennessee.
Tennessee,
it up.
Who could definitely play spoiler.
Oh no, they actually have Georgia, Florida, and Mississippi State. If they
okay.
If they went out with that schedule, that will throw. If they beat Georgia this weekend, it's chaos all of a sudden, because a 2-loss Georgia, it can definitely still get in if they beat. They're the ones who play Tennessee. If they went out their schedule other than Ole Miss, they very well could get in. Are you going to leave an Ole Miss team with 2 losses with 1 on the road to LSU, where you picked LSU to win that game just based off of how many games in a row Ole Miss had played, how many road games in a row.
They had a really poor scheduling in terms of they were on the road for like 3 out of the last 4 weeks. LSU was coming off of a bye week. They were fresh. They were at home for the last 3 weeks. So, yeah, I mean, it was a poorly scheduled situation for Ole Miss to go into.
Yeah, so these teams are going to make it difficult on the committee. I think the committee thought they were going to have it easy this year, because I think in a lot of previous years, it would have been pretty easy to pick your top 12 and not have much controversy. Well, it just so happens we finally get this playoff system, and now it's just madness with 1 and 2 loss teams, and even maybe a 3-loss team knocks on the door at the end of the day. I mean, you look at a South Carolina, if they went out with, I mean, they're a team also who could really throw a wrench into things.
Yeah, I don't think a 3-loss team this year, as of right now, where things stand, it's not happening. As of right now, where things stand. Now, there could be a lot of chaos that ensues, and maybe you can make a case for even maybe Boise State's not the 12th, the 12th seed. Maybe you get a 3-loss team from an SEC, I don't know. Maybe Bama drops a game. I don't know.
It'd be South. Man, I'd have a hard time, because if South Carolina wins out with their schedule, they would beat Vanderbilt, Missouri, Wofford, and then Clemson.
Yeah. Well, South Carolina, so I teased it earlier. South Carolina needs to be in the top 25. I'd put them in right now over Washington State. I'd put them in over Clemson, and I'd put them in over Missouri and Army. And I don't care what anybody says.
I'd put them in over Louisville as well.
Yeah. And, if Louisville has a 3-loss team, I think here's the way I kind of have to look at some of these lower ranked teams. Now, not always the case for the upper ranked teams or higher ranked teams, but for these lower ranked teams within the 15 to 25 range, who am I taking in a one-on-one head-to-head neutral sided game? Who am I taking? I'm taking South Carolina and Vanderbilt over a vast majority. Maybe an Iowa State, probably a Pittsburgh. Maybe Colorado, definitely Washington State, definitely Louisville, definitely Clemson, Missouri, and Army for sure. I'm taking South Carolina over all those teams. Vandy, maybe not as many of those teams, but I do think Vandy deserves a spot at the table as well in the top 25.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about a neutral field, I would take South Carolina up to number 17.
Yeah.
Behind Ole Miss, who they lost to. That was their worst
Right.
game of the season. I would favor them over Iowa State, Pittsburgh, K-State, Colorado, Washington State, Louisville, Clemson, Missouri, Army.
So the fact that they're not in the playoff, or not in the playoffs, but not in the top 25 right now, I think is a travesty. And I think the committee is going based on what they get from the AP voting, which I think the AP poll is already a joke as it is, especially the way they go week to week on Missouri has no place in the top 25. And in any ranking, in any polling system, Missouri does not have any place in a top 25
What's
as a top 25
Missouri's
team.
not in the AP,
Which is bizarre.
In the playoff committee,
but they're in the playoff committee.
Which that was the one that really puzzled me, because the AP, I agree with you. The AP's a joke, and the coaches poll does have Missouri at 22. The AP doesn't have them in at all, and then the playoff committee has them in at 24. And I think we both agree that they don't belong there.
Yeah. All right, Jake. Well, any last comments on the top 25, on the way that the tournament would go? Here, let's go ahead and look just real quickly before we go. Here's how the first round of the 12-team college football bracket projection would go. It'd be Boise State as the 12 seed taking on Ohio State. The winner of that game would play BYU in the quarterfinals as the 4 seed. Indiana, the 9 seed, would be taking on Tennessee, the 8th seed, and would be playing the winner of that game would take on the number 1 seeded Oregon Ducks in the quarterfinals. The 11 seed Alabama Crimson Tide would travel to Texas in the first round. The winner of that game would play Miami. I think the winner of that game would also beat Miami to get to the semifinals, because I think the first round game would be a harder matchup for both of those two teams than Miami. That's just me. And then the number 10 ranked Notre Dame Fighting Irish would travel to Penn State. The both teams that choked the most fraudulent That'd teams.
That'd be such a boring game. Oh,
it'd be
God,
awful.
it'd be 10-7.
And then the winner of that would go on to get their ass beat by Georgia in the quarterfinals. So, yeah.
Talk about an easy road for Georgia.
Yeah, Georgia would take a very easy road to at least get to the semifinals. So that's kind of how the tournament would look as of right now, according to these rankings.
Yeah, and it'll be something that we're going to monitor each week. And as things shuffle up, or there's a big upsets or whatever it is, there'll be a lot more discussion about it, because this is where the fun begins. This is where the fun begins with this 12-team format.
To quote the great Anakin Skywalker. Let's go ahead and give a little bit of an injury report, Jake. I know an update. Velton Gardner is likely to be out for the remainder of the season with an eye injury. Makuba is questionable, Bond probable.
Yeah, that's a first for me on hearing an eye injury, and I haven't been able to find any details of what it is. I mean, I have no idea. It must be painful as hell, though. I mean, if you're out for the season with an eye injury, if you've ever injured an eye or had a cut on your eye, it is awful.
Yeah.
And typically the eyeball heals pretty fast. So the fact it's knocking him out for the season, something freakish must have happened, or it must have been off the field, because that's a new one. I have never heard of that.
Yeah, neither have I. Florida has 16 players on their injury reported list. 10 of those players are going to be reported out for the game. 6 of them questionable. DJ Lagway, the big question mark. He did practice this week, according to the Florida reports and according to Billy Napier. To me, again, does not necessarily mean that he just ran with the first team, looked great. He could have been going through walkthroughs for all we know. A hamstring injury, and just the reason why I'm so skeptical on DJ Lagway playing, and I know this, it has to be some sort of mind trick game, Jedi mind trick that Billy Napier is trying to use on Steve Sarkisian. Unlucky for him, it doesn't work on the strong-minded. It only works on the weak-minded. But coming off of a hamstring injury, you can't just go to the next week. I've never seen that before. I've never seen a player have a hammy and then play the next week. He's at least out at least 1 or 2 weeks.
And he got carted off, I believe.
There's no
I
way.
mean, it wasn't he ran off. It was like a slight pull. They were careful with it. And my other thing is, if it's a hamstring, why would you want to play him in this game? You're not playing for an SEC title. He's a true freshman.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing you want to do is send him out there and then tear it or do something that's going to knock him out for the season. And it's going to cause him to miss a lot of valuable reps because if he's not full speed, I don't think this is the defense you want to throw him out there
Correct.
against.
Yeah. Report came out today or maybe yesterday that the Texas Longhorn defense has the highest rated defense through 11 weeks of play or through 10 weeks of play, according to PFF, which, again, I take with a grain of salt with any type of PFF grade, especially when it comes to college football. But they are the highest rated defense in the country, is the Texas Longhorn defense, according to Pro Football Focus. So, Jake, real quick, let's go ahead and dive into our next segment. We are going to talk about the next level players. Who on your list, 3 guys we can name, we can go one at a time if we want to, of Texas Longhorn players that you'd like to see reach that next level. And maybe it's not just for a career, but from week to week, who has kind of been a little bit maybe of a letdown, and who would you like to see step it up against Florida this week?
Yeah. And this doesn't even necessarily their season's been a letdown. It just means I know they're a really good player that can do more than they've shown. And for a couple of mine, it's going to be what they've shown in the last few weeks where competition's gotten a little bit tougher than the start of the season. And the first off for me, and I cheated, I put 2 names here because they play the same position, and we've
Jake,
seen both of them.
You put like 6 names total on a 3-name list, and it took like half of my choices away. So thank you very much for that.
Well, that's tough. You should have done it first. I got DJ Campbell / Cole Hudson. I thought DJ Campbell the last 2 weeks especially has really just played some of his worst games since the start of last year. And especially in pass protection, a lot of that pressure has come from that right side. I think the run blocking is pretty good from that side, but we've seen too many penalties come from, especially Cam Williams. Spoiler alert, that's my second one. But just that right side of the offensive line, that's my 1 and 2. They need to do better in pass protection, and they need to do better in playing clean football.
Well, you left me some low-hanging fruit, and I do appreciate that, but I am going to go with Quinn Ewers as my number 1 player that I'd like to see step it up this week against Georgia. Not to say, again, I don't think he played worlds better from Georgia to Vanderbilt, and I can acknowledge that. However, I know for a fact, I know there is a next level to his play that we've seen from a consistent basis. And a lot of it is offensive line not committing penalties and negating, third down conversions and having to come back and go to 3rd and 9. I get all that. That all plays a factor in it. I still think Quinn Ewers has another level to his game. In fact, I know he has another level to his game that we haven't seen in the last, say, 3 to 4 weeks. Really, since coming back from his injury, he hasn't been 100% Quinn Ewers. This is the week I'd like to see that actually take place. And we're like, yep, Quinn's back. We feel good going into this final stretch of the season.
Yeah, and statistics would back you up as well, just as far as his intermediate passing completion percentages are worse since he's come back. His average depth of target's worse. Everything's been down for him since he's come back. But my third, and this is where I really just got cheeky with it by putting a bunch of names. First off, I was going to put Trey Moore. I was like, he's played good football. And so I wanted to kind of clarify what I meant is whether it be a Trey Moore, whether it be a Ethan Burke, I would like to see another pass rusher emerge other than just Colin Simmons and Barron Sorrell. And by pass rusher emerge, I mean it be sacks, not just pressures. And even Sorrell can kind of fall into that. He has forced a ton of pressure. Sorrell's been awesome this year. And this is why you have to get nitpicky with the defense because they've been so dominant. But I still think as much as the sack numbers have started to rack up as the season's gone on, I still think there's another gear to this. I think there's a level where again, even against a Georgia and then, coming up with the A&M, Kentucky, Florida, they can just rack up the sack numbers. And so I really want to see them start to just regularly get sacks on big plays.
Speaking of sack numbers, Colin Simmons has been announced as a Sean Alexander semifinalist award recipient, which is the number 1 true freshman in the country. That will probably go to Ryan Williams, wide receiver at Alabama, but Colin Simmons named as a semifinalist. So shout out the work that he's done. Since you've kind of gone through your three, I'll just quickly go through the last two of mine, and then we'll wrap up the show. Jaden Blue would be my number two player of players I want to step up. But I think that also just comes with opportunity. I think he, when given the opportunity, at least in the Vanderbilt game, he kind of showed some spark. And I think Sark is going to start integrating him slowly but surely, really since that Oklahoma game. His playing time and his opportunities to carry the ball have diminished greatly. I'd like to see him actually getting carries out of the backfield, whether that's on outside zones or whatever that looks like. He does get the ball in passing downs as well, more so than a Trey Wisner does. But I want to see a big play from Jaden Blue. I want to see a 50-yard run. I want to see, a 60-yard touchdown run, or even a 40-yard screen pass. I need to see a big play from Jaden Blue, and I know he's got that ability in him. And lastly, Isaiah Bond, mostly just coming back from injury. It's not necessarily that he was playing bad before his injury. It's more so coming back from an injury, didn't play against Vanderbilt, missed the bye, or obviously had the bye week. Now he's getting back into action. I'd like to see this offense go to Bond early and maybe see him pop off a big play or maybe an early first quarter touchdown.
Yeah, he's definitely someone that you noticed him being out in that
Yep.
Vanderbilt game. You noticed when he was out against Georgia. I think not having Bond in the lineup made a lot of fans, including myself, realize just how elite and how important he is to this offense. I'm not really too worried about replacing him. I think the offense will be fine without him in the long run, but him being out there opens things up for Golden. It opened things up for Wingo. It opens things up for some of these younger guys, DeAndre Moore. And when he's not out there, teams key in on Bond. They make sure that they have a safety over the top to help him. And so when you have extra attention towards one guy, that always opens things up for everyone else, and even including the run game. So as long as he's fully healthy, I think he opens up a lot of things for this offense, whether that be through the air or even in the ground game.
All right, well, Jake, that is going to do it. The final ballots have been cast for the College Football Playoff Committee, and their final polls and rankings have been released. This is our reaction to it, and yes, it's coming a couple days later, but I think we are in for a very fun weekend, a very fun Saturday. For tomorrow's episode, we're really going to break down more so the scheme and how Texas matches up against Florida. And then also we will give our final predictions for the Texas-Florida game, including a handful of Saturday's best games coming up. And we're going to give that all to you right here on All In Horns, your daily fix for the Texas Longhorns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. And as always, I'm Tanner Carlson. He's Jake Jimerson. Welcome.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.